The storm trapped 12 strangers in the Mountain Pass Hotel. By dawn, one would be dead with a knife in his back. I'm Daniel Cross, a drifter with investigators' eyes. I had 8 hours to find the killer before the storm broke, before the murderer walked free. But the victim was protecting something sacred, and the real crime started 20 years before any of us arrived. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The wind hit Mountain Pass like God's fist, howling through the canyon walls with a sound that made horses scream and strong men pray. Daniel Cross felt the first icy drops as he guided his buckskin gelding up the steep trail toward the only shelter for 50 miles. The Mountain Pass Hotel, a 3-story timber structure clinging to the cliff face like a barnacle on a ship's hull. Lightning split the darkening sky, illuminating the hotel in stark white flashes that made it look less like refuge and more like a tombstone marking where the wilderness ended and human folly began. Cross pulled his coat tighter, squinting against wind that carried the smell of ozone and coming violence. He'd been through blizzards in Montana, sandstorms in Arizona, and hurricanes on the Texas coast during his years as a Pinkerton detective. This storm felt different, heavier, more deliberate, as if nature itself was setting a stage for something darker than weather. The hotel's front porch offered minimal protection from the deluge that now fell in solid sheets. Cross tied his horse to the hitching post, grabbed his saddlebags, and pushed through the heavy oak door into warmth and lamplight. The lobby was small but well appointed for a mountain establishment, a registration desk of polished pine, chairs upholstered in faded burgundy velvet, a stone fireplace where flames crackled and danced. The smell hit him immediately. Wood smoke, wet wool, coffee boiling too long, and beneath it all, the particular tension of strangers forced into unwanted proximity. 11 faces turned toward him as he entered. Cross cataloged them with the automatic efficiency of a man trained to read people the way others read newspapers. An older couple huddled near the fire, the man's expensive suit marking him as money, the woman's jewelry confirming it. A Catholic priest in black cassock stood by the window, rosary beads clicking through his fingers like an abacus counting sins. 2 cowboys, young and cocky, played cards at a corner table, their tie-down holsters advertising violence as profession. A woman in a traveling dress sat alone, her face hidden behind a veil of morning black. A massive man, easily 6'4" and built like a bull, stood near the bar, his beard thick as brambles, his eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much frontier justice. A Chinese man in traditional silk robes waited with hands folded, his face an impassive mask. Near the stairs, a well-dressed gambler shuffled cards with the fluid grace of a snake moving through grass. A young woman, maybe 19, sat reading a worn Bible, her plain dress and simple bonnet marking her as either deeply religious or deeply poor. And finally, the hotel proprietor himself, a thin, nervous man with spectacles and thinning hair who wrung his hands as if trying to wash away invisible blood. "Welcome to Mountain Pass Hotel," the proprietor said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of a man perpetually expecting disaster. "Name's Harrison Webb. You'll be our 12th guest tonight. Storm's got everyone trapped." He gestured toward the windows, where rain hammered glass with fists of water. "Telegraphs down. Roads washed out on both sides. We're isolated until morning at the earliest." Cross signed a register with careful script. Daniel Cross, Denver. No profession listed. No reason to advertise his investigative background. People tended to either clam up or get nervous around former lawmen. "Any rooms left?" "Last one. 3rd floor into the hall. Number 12. Webb handed over a brass key. "Dinner's at 6. We've got venison stew and sourdough. Not fancy, but it's hot." Cross nodded and headed for the stairs, aware of eyes tracking his movement. The gambler studied him with particular intensity, as if trying to remember where they might have crossed paths. The massive bearded man simply glared, his hand resting near a Bowie knife the size of a small sword. The priest blessed himself and returned to his prayers. Room 12 was Spartan, iron bed frame, washstand with a chip basin, single window overlooking the churning chaos of the storm. Cross set his saddlebags on the bed and moved to the window. Lightning painted the landscape in strobing white, the canyon dropping away into darkness below. The road washed into a river of mud, pine trees bending nearly double under wind that screamed like a living thing. They were truly isolated. Whatever happened in this hotel tonight would stay secret until the storm passed. That thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a warning. Dinner brought everyone together in the hotel's small dining room. Long table set for 12. Oil lamps casting dancing shadows on log walls. The storm a constant presence beyond thin windows. Cross took a seat that let him observe the entire room. Old detective habit, impossible to break. Webb served the promised stew while his wife, a silent woman who moved like a ghost, poured coffee with hands that shook slightly. The wealthy man cleared his throat. Name's Theodore Blackwood. This is my wife, Constance. We're on our way to San Francisco. Some cattle business. His Boston accent was thick as molasses, marking him as Eastern money trying to buy Western influence. Father Antonio Mendez, the priest said quietly, traveling to establish a mission in the mining camps. The two cowboys exchanged glances before the talkative one spoke up. Caleb and Luke Sherman, brothers, heading to Wyoming for ranch work. The veiled woman remained silent until all eyes turned her direction. Finally, with obvious reluctance, she lifted the veil slightly. Her face was beautiful but hard, carved by grief or guilt into something both compelling and frightening. Delilah Kane, widow. That's all you need to know. The massive bearded man grunted. Magnus Thorne, trapper. 2 words, flat as tombstones, daring anyone to ask more. The Chinese man bowed slightly. I am called Mr. Chen. I trade in goods between territories. The gambler smiled, all charm and practiced ease. Silas Quinn, purveyor of entertainment and games of chance. He produced a silver dollar from thin air, made it dance across his knuckles, then vanished it again. Anyone interested in a friendly game after dinner? The young woman with the Bible spoke softly, almost apologetically. Rebecca Miller. I'm traveling to meet my intended husband in Montana. We've been corresponding for 2 years. That left only Cross. 11 pairs of eyes turned expectantly. He'd learned long ago that partial truths worked better than lies. Daniel Cross. Drifter. I go where work takes me. Thunder crashed so loud the building shook. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed. The lamps flickered but held. In that moment of near darkness, Cross saw fear flash across several faces. Real fear, primal and instinctive. These people weren't just uncomfortable strangers, forced together by weather. They were scared. But scared of the storm or something else. Dinner continued with stilted conversation. Theodore Blackwood dominated, pontificating about cattle prices and railroad expansion. His wife Constance said nothing, merely picked at her food with the mechanical movements of a woman who'd stopped tasting life years ago. Father Mendez asked Rebecca Miller about her intended, gently probing whether she'd actually met the man. Silas Quinn regaled the Sherman brothers with stories of legendary poker games and fortunes won and lost. Delilah Kane ate in silence, her veil lowered again, her posture rigid. Magnus Thorne attacked his stew like it might fight back, his massive hands dwarfing the spoon. Mr. Chin observed everything, said nothing, his dark eyes missing no detail. Cross studied them all, unconsciously cataloging details the way he'd been trained. Theodore Blackwood wore a gold watch chain, but no wedding ring, despite his wife beside him. Constance Blackwood's jewelry was expensive but old-fashioned, suggesting inherited wealth rather than newly made fortune. Father Mendez's hands bore calluses inconsistent with a purely clerical life. He'd done hard labor recently. Caleb Sherman had a poorly healed scar across his knuckles, the kind you get from hitting someone's teeth. His brother Luke kept touching a pocket, nervous gesture suggesting something valuable hidden there. Delilah Kane's morning dress was dusty from travel, but well-made, expensive fabric. The veiled widow had money, or had once. Magnus Thorne's boots were custom-made, intricate beadwork suggesting native craftsmanship, unusual for a white trapper. Mr. Chen's silk robes were embroidered with symbols Cross didn't recognize, but the man's hands bore chemical burns, stains that spoke of work beyond simple trading. Silas Quinn's deck of cards was worn smooth, professional equipment, but his coat bore bloodstains along the hem, faded but visible. Rebecca Miller's Bible had pages marked with dried flowers, sentimental, but her hands were rough, working hands that contradicted her stated purpose as a mail-order bride. Too many inconsistencies, too many secrets in too small a space. Cross felt the familiar prickle at the base of his skull, the detective's instinct that screamed something was wrong here, something beyond the obvious discomfort of forced company. Harrison Webb cleared the plates with his wife's silent assistance. "We've got coffee and brandy in the parlor for those interested. Rooms are available whenever you're ready to retire. I'll keep the fire going all night." The group dispersed slowly. The Blackwoods retreated to the parlor. Silas Quinn managed to lure the Sherman brothers into a card game. Father Mendez returned to his prayers near the fire. Rebecca Miller went upstairs with her Bible. Delilah Kane stood at the window, staring into the storm's fury. Magnus Thorne poured himself brandy, enough to kill a normal man's liver, and settled into a chair that groaned under his weight. Mr. Chen vanished so quietly Cross wasn't sure exactly when he'd left. Cross lingered, pretending to warm himself by the fire while actually observing. In his experience, the hours after dinner or before bed were when people revealed themselves, when guards dropped, when alcohol loosened tongues, when fear made people seek allies or confess sins. He wasn't disappointed. By 9 o'clock, tensions had surfaced like rotten old timber. Theodore Blackwood had drunk enough to become belligerent, berating his wife in harsh whispers that still carried across the room. Silas Quinn was winning consistently at cards, a fact that was making Caleb Sherman increasingly agitated. Father Mendez approached Delilah Kane, attempting pastoral comfort, but she rebuffed him with venom that surprised everyone. Magnus Thorne watched it all with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Chen reappeared from wherever he'd been, carrying a small leather case. He approached Theodore Blackwood with formal courtesy. "Mr. Blackwood, I believe we have business to discuss. The matter of the contract." Blackwood's face went white, then red with fury. "Not here. Not now. But the terms were." "I said not here." Blackwood stood so abruptly his chair toppled. "That matter is concluded. There's nothing further to discuss." Mr. Chen's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold as a winter lake. "As you wish. But some debts cannot be avoided simply by declaring them concluded." The exchange sent a ripple through the room. Whatever business these men shared, it was dark enough to crack Blackwood's veneer of civilization. Cross filed the information away, adding it to his growing catalog of secrets. By 11 o'clock, most guests had retreated to their rooms. Only Cross, Magnus Thorne, and Silas Quinn remained in the parlor, nursing drinks and listening to the storm's unrelenting assault. Webb had retired to his quarters behind the kitchen, leaving the guests to police themselves. "Hell of a storm," Quinn said conversationally, shuffling his deck with absent expertise. "Almost makes you believe in divine judgment." Magnus Thorne grunted. "Ain't nothing divine about weather. It just is. Like death, like time. Comes for everything, gives no reasons." "Philosophy from a trapper," Quinn observed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How unexpected." "I read," Thorne said flatly. "Surprised? Most people are. They see the size, the beard. They think simple. That's when I know I got advantage." Cross decided to fish for information. "Either of you pass through this area often?" Quinn shook his head. "First time. I usually work the mining camps farther south, but I heard there was a game worth playing up in Montana. Figured I'd risk the mountain pass." "Been through 3 times," Thorne said. "Always stay here when I do." Webb's honest, his wife cooks decent, and the beds don't have too many bugs. But something feels different this time. His eyes found Cross. You feel it too. I can tell. You got the look of a lawman, even if you claim otherwise. Cross kept his expression neutral, just observant, habit from staying alive. Aha. Thorne drained his brandy. Well, observe this. Half the people in this hotel are lying about why they're here, and lies in close quarters during storms. He stood, his massive frame blocking the lamplight. That's how people end up dead. He walked upstairs, each step creaking under his weight, leaving Cross and Quinn alone. He's not wrong, Quinn said softly. About the lies, I mean. I can spot a bluff across a poker table at midnight in a mine shaft, and everyone here is bluffing about something. His eyes met Cross's with surprising directness. Including you, friend. Including you. Before Cross could respond, a scream tore through the building. Hi! Terrified, unmistakably female. Both men were moving before it ended, drawing weapons and racing for the stairs. Doors burst open on all 3 floors as guests emerged in nightclothes and panic. The scream had come from the 2nd floor. Cross reached it first, Quinn behind him, others converging from all directions. Rebecca Miller stood in the hallway, her Bible dropped at her feet, her face white as bone, pointing at a door that stood slightly ajar. Room 7. Cross pushed past her gently, revolver raised, and kicked the door fully open. The room was dark except for lightning flashes through the window. In those strobing bursts of white light, Cross saw him. Theodore Blackwood lay face down on the floor, arms outstretched as if he'd been reaching for the door when he died. The back of his expensive suit was dark with blood, and buried between his shoulder blades was a knife. Not a cheap weapon, but an exquisite blade with an ivory handle carved in intricate patterns. The storm raged on outside, indifferent to human tragedy. And somewhere in this hotel, trapped by weather and circumstance, a murderer waited among them, watching, listening, and almost certainly not finished. Cross dropped to one knee beside the body, fingers finding Blackwood's neck where a pulse should have been. Nothing. The skin was still warm, death recent, within the last 30 minutes. Blood had pooled beneath the corpse, soaking into the floorboards in a dark stain that would remain long after the body was removed, a permanent mark of violence. Behind him, chaos erupted. Constance Blackwood pushed through the crowd, saw her husband, and released a wail that was more rage than grief, the sound of a woman betrayed by death, but not particularly mourning the deceased. Father Mendez caught her as she collapsed, his arms surprisingly strong for a slender priest. Rebecca Miller sobbed into her hands. The Sherman brothers stood with hands on their revolvers, eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting the killer to reveal himself through guilt or panic. Silas Quinn leaned against the doorframe with studied nonchalance, but his gambler's face had gone pale, professional mask slipping. Magnus Thorne simply stared at the body with the dispassionate interest of someone accustomed to death. Mr. Chin arrived last, took in the scene with a single glance, and stepped back into shadows. Delilah Kane watched from her doorway across the hall, veil still in place despite the late hour, her posture rigid as a condemned woman awaiting the noose. Harrison Webb pushed through, saw the corpse, and made a sound like a kicked dog. No, no, no. Not in my hotel. Please God, not in my hotel. Your hotel's the least of our concerns, Cross said, standing and blocking Webb's view of the body. His detective's mind was already cataloging details, building the sequence of events. Everyone needs to stay exactly where they are. Nobody moves, nobody touches anything. Who appointed you marshal? Caleb Sherman demanded, his hand still on his Colt. Far as I know, you're just another traveler. Cross met his eyes with the cold authority of a man who'd faced down killers from Denver to El Paso. I'm a former Pinkerton detective. I've investigated 43 murders. I know what I'm doing. Now everyone back away from this door. The revelation sent another ripple through the gathering. Father Mendez blessed himself. Delilah Kane's posture shifted subtly. Relief, fear. Quinn's professional mask returned, his expression going carefully neutral. Mr. Chun simply nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. A Pinkerton, Magnus Thorne said slowly. Explains the eyes. You've been watching us all night like we're suspects. Because you are, Cross replied flatly. All of you. Someone in this hotel murdered Theodore Blackwood, and until I figure out who, everyone's dangerous. He turned back to the crime scene, forcing his mind to override the emotional chaos behind him. Focus on facts. Facts didn't lie, didn't panic, didn't murder in jealous rage or desperate fear. Facts were clean. The room was small, identical to Cross's own. Single bed, now rumpled where Blackwood had apparently been resting before death. A trunk at the foot of the bed, still locked. Clothes hung on wall pegs, expensive suit, spare shirt, polished boots. On the washstand, a straight razor, shaving soap, a bottle of cologne. The window was closed and latched from inside. The door had been locked. Cross could see the key still in the interior lock. Yet somehow the killer had entered, struck, and left, leaving the door ajar but the victim positioned as if he'd been moving toward escape. Cross examined the knife without touching it. 8-inch blade, perfectly balanced, professional quality. The ivory handle bore carved symbols, Chinese characters. His eyes found Mr. Chun in the hallway. This yours? Chen's face remained impassive. I trade in many goods, Detective Cross. Knives among them. But I do not recognize that particular blade. A lie. Cross could smell it, the same way dogs smell fear. But pushing now would cause Chun to retreat completely. Better to let him think he'd fooled the detective. Give him rope to hang himself later. How did the killer get in? Rebecca Miller asked, her voice steadier now, curiosity overriding shock. The door was locked from inside. We all heard Miss Miller scream, and when we arrived, the door was just barely open, but the key still in the lock. Windows, Luke Sherman suggested. Cross shook his head. 3rd story, Sheercliff below. Nobody could climb up in this storm without equipment, and the windows latched from inside anyway. So we got a locked room murder, Quinn observed, like something from a dime novel. Killer walks through walls, strikes, vanishes like smoke. Nothing supernatural about it, Cross said, though unease prickled his spine. He'd investigated locked room murders before. They always had rational explanations, usually involving keys, duplicate access, or timing that created the illusion of impossibility. Someone got in and out. We just need to figure out how. Or, Caleb Sherman said darkly, the killer's still in the room, hiding. That set everyone back a step. Cross drew his revolver and methodically checked every possible hiding place. Under the bed, inside the trunk, still locked. No signs of tampering. Behind the sparse furniture. Nothing. The room contained only the dead man and the mystery of how he'd become that way. We need to secure the body, Father Mendez said quietly. Cover him at least. Give him dignity in death, whatever he was in life. Nobody touches anything until I'm finished examining the scene, Cross commanded. He moved to Blackwood's trunk and examined the lock. Cheap manufacture, easily picked. He pulled a thin wire from his coat, old detective habit, always carry tools, and manipulated the mechanism until it clicked open. Inside, he found clothes, papers, and something interesting, a leather-bound journal. You can't read his private writings. Constance Blackwood protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Cross ignored her and flipped through pages, filled with neat handwriting, financial records, business dealings, and near the end, entries that made his blood run cold. The contract with Chun must be fulfilled, regardless of consequences. The cargo is too valuable to lose over moral squeamishness. Constance suspects. She's always been too clever for comfort. May need to take steps to ensure her silence. Magnus Thorne appeared at the Montana meeting. Recognize him from the Colorado incident 3 years ago. He cannot know I'm here. If he discovers the truth, I'm dead. Cross looked up, found Thorne in the crowd. The massive trapper's expression hadn't changed, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition? Confirmation? Detective Cross, Father Mendez said urgently. The body. Please. Let me at least say prayers for his soul." Cross nodded slowly, stepping back. As Mendez entered to perform last rites, Cross moved into the hallway and addressed the assembled guests. "Here's what we know. Theodore Blackwood was murdered within the last hour, stabbed in the back with what appears to be a Chinese knife. The room was locked from inside. The window was secure. Yet somehow the killer entered, committed murder, and escaped. That means either someone has a duplicate key, or the killer was already in the room when Blackwood entered." Silas Quinn finished. "Waiting, which means premeditation." "This wasn't random violence," Cross agreed. "This was execution. Someone here had reason to want Theodore Blackwood dead, and that someone is still among us." Thunder crashed so violently the building shook. Every lamp in the hallway guttered and died simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness. In that moment of blind chaos, Cross heard a sound that chilled his bones, a low laugh, barely audible over the storm, coming from somewhere in the blackness. Then the lamps flickered back to life, and everyone was exactly where they'd been. Or were they? Had someone moved in those 3 seconds of darkness? "Everyone to the parlor," Cross commanded. "Now, we're going to have a conversation about why Theodore Blackwood died." They filed downstairs in a grim procession. The corpse left with only Father Mendez to guard it. Webb lit every lamp in the parlor, driving back shadows, though it felt like trying to hold back an ocean with a teacup. The storm's fury had intensified, if possible, the wind screaming like all the damned souls from every frontier hanging, the rain hammering the roof with fists of water that threatened to cave in the timber. Cross positioned himself with his back to the fire, facing the assembled suspects. Because that's what they were now, whatever they'd been before, suspects in a murder that had transformed their forced company into a death trap. Theodore Blackwood wasn't just a cattle buyer, Cross began, holding up the journal. He was involved in something darker, something involving illegal contracts, valuable cargo, and at least one person in this room who wanted him dead for it. Constance Blackwood raised her veiled face, and when she spoke, her voice carried a venom Cross hadn't heard before. "My husband was a bastard who made his fortune trafficking in human misery. Opium from California, weapons to reservation renegades, and worse, much worse." She looked around the room. "So yes, detective, someone wanted him dead. Probably everyone in this room had reason once they knew what he truly was." "You knew?" Cross demanded. "For 5 years," she said bitterly. 5 years I played the dutiful wife while he built an empire on blood and addiction. 5 years I smiled at society parties while knowing the truth. And yes, I'm glad he's dead, but I didn't kill him. I wanted to watch him hang properly, see his reputation destroyed before his life ended. Stabbing him in a hotel room denies me that satisfaction." Cross believed her. Hatred that pure doesn't hide behind a knife in the dark. It wants spectacle, wants the world to witness justice. "Mr. Chen, the journal mentions a contract with you." "What cargo?" Chen's mask finally cracked slightly. "I am a businessman, detective. Sometimes business requires transporting goods across territories. Mr. Blackwood arranged certain shipments that local authorities might have found questionable. But I assure you, I had no reason to kill him. He owed me money, considerable money. Dead men pay no debts." Also logical. Murder was bad for business when the corpse owed you a fortune. "Magnus Thorne," Cross continued. "Blackwood wrote that you knew him from Colorado 3 years ago. He was afraid you discovered something." "What?" Thorne's expression went dark as a thunderhead. For a moment, Cross thought the giant might simply refuse to answer, might stand and walk out daring anyone to stop him. Then slowly he spoke. "Colorado, 1884, Silver Creek Settlement. Blackwood sold rifles to a renegade band of Crow who were resisting relocation. Federal policy, morally wrong, but that's not what mattered. Those rifles were used to attack a freight wagon carrying women and children from the disbanded reservation to the new one. 12 died, including my wife and daughter." The room went silent except for the storm's relentless assault. "I've been hunting Theodore Blackwood for 3 years," Thorne continued. his voice flat as a tombstone. Tracked him across 5 territories. Finally caught up to him here. So yes, detective, I had every reason to kill him. But I didn't. Because I wanted him to know. Wanted him to look into my eyes and understand exactly why he was dying before I ended him. Stabbing him in the back while he slept? That's a coward's killing. And whatever else I am, I'm no coward. Cross studied the man, weighing truth against motive. Thorne had the strongest reason for murder, but his explanation rang true. Men like Magnus Thorne didn't need to hide. They delivered vengeance face to face. Made it personal. Made it hurt. What about the rest of you? Cross demanded. Blackwood's journal mentions the Colorado incident, but there must be others he wronged. Anyone else here have a personal connection? Silence. Then Delilah Kane stood, lifted her veil completely. Her face was indeed beautiful, but it bore the haunted look of someone who'd walked through hell and returned changed. Theodore Blackwood destroyed my family. My husband invested everything in one of Blackwood's schemes, a silver mine that Blackwood claimed was rich with ore. It was worthless. Blackwood knew it. He sold shares anyway, took the money, disappeared before the truth came out. My husband shot himself rather than face bankruptcy. I became the widow Kane that day, and I swore I'd see Blackwood answer for every life he ruined. So you followed him here? Cross said. Yes, I've been following him for 6 months, waiting for the right moment. But I didn't kill him tonight. I wanted him to suffer more than a quick knife could deliver. Everyone had motive. Everyone had reason. But only one had acted. The knife, Cross said, turning back to Mr. Chun. Chinese manufacture. Ivory handle with carved symbols. You recognize it because you've seen it before. Possibly even sold it. Who did you sell it to? Chun hesitated, calculation visible behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. 3 months ago in San Francisco. A knife matching that description. I sold it to. He paused, then pointed. To him. Every head turned. Chun was pointing at Father Antonio Mendez, who just ascended the stairs from guarding the body. The priest stopped mid-step, his face going white, his hand instinctively moving to his cassock, as if checking for something that should be there but wasn't. It's not what you think, Mendez said quickly. I bought that knife for protection. The territories are dangerous for a traveling priest, but I lost it 2 weeks ago, somewhere between Denver and here. I reported it to local authorities in every town I passed through. Convenient, Caleb Sherman said, his hand drifting to his revolver. Priest with a knife. That's rich. I swear before God, Mendez began. Your God's not here tonight, Father. Cross interrupted. Someone stole your knife and used it to kill Blackwood, which means the murder was premeditated. The killer needed a weapon that couldn't be traced back to them. A priest's knife was perfect. Nobody suspects a man of God. So the priest didn't do it, Quinn observed. But somebody took his knife and framed him, which means we're looking for someone clever, someone who plans ahead. A crash from upstairs made everyone jump. Then footsteps, running, panicked. Harrison Webb appeared at the top of the stairs, his face ashen. The body, Blackwood's body, it's gone. They took the stairs in a stampede of boots and fear, Cross leading with his revolver drawn, Quinn and the Sherman brothers close behind, everyone else following in a confused mass of panic and morbid curiosity. Room 7's door stood wide open, lamplight spilling into the hallway, and inside nothing. No body, no blood-stained floor. Even the knife had vanished, as if Theodore Blackwood had never existed, never died, never bled out on those boards. This is impossible, Webb whispered, his voice cracking. I saw him. We all saw him. The blood, the knife. Was there. Cross finished grimly, dropping to one knee where Blackwood's corpse should have been. His fingers traced the floorboards, finding what his eyes had already registered. The wood was damp, recently scrubbed. Someone had cleaned the crime scene with efficiency that spoke of practice, of someone who knew how to erase evidence, how to make death disappear. The blood soaked into the wood, Magnus Thorne said from the doorway, his bulk blocking most of the light. You can scrub the surface, but you can't get it all out. Not without tearing up the floor. Cross pulled a match from his coat, struck it, held the flame close to the boards. In the flickering orange light, dark stains became visible in the wood's grain. Theodore Blackwood's final contribution to the world, preserved in pine like a signature in stone. He's right. Someone cleaned this room, but they couldn't hide everything. But where's the body? Rebecca Miller asked, her voice small and frightened. You can't just carry a full-grown man through a hotel without anyone noticing. Except you could, Cross realized, if everyone was gathered in the parlor. If the killer had waited until all the suspects were accounted for downstairs, then they'd have perhaps 10 minutes to move the corpse, clean the scene, and escape before Webb came up to check. 10 minutes of opportunity while Cross had been interrogating the guests. He'd been played, manipulated into gathering everyone together, giving the killer exactly the opening they needed. We searched the building, Cross commanded. Every room, every closet, every corner. The body has to be here. You can't take a corpse outside in this storm. The mud alone would leave tracks we could follow at first light. They split into groups. Cross paired himself with Magnus Thorne, figuring the massive trapper was either innocent or bold enough to hide his guilt behind cooperation. They started on the 3rd floor, checking each guest room methodically. Cross's own room untouched. The Sherman brothers' room, sparse belongings, worn saddlebags, nothing unusual. Silas Quinn's room, a veritable arsenal of cards, dice, and gambling equipment, but no corpse. Rebecca Miller's room, heartbreakingly bare except for a Bible and one change of clothes. Mr. Chen's room locked. Chen himself appeared with the key, opened it to reveal trunks of trade goods, silk, tea, jade figurines, but no body. Delilah Kane's room, empty, though Cross noticed a journal on the nightstand, its pages covered in handwriting that formed lists of names, dates, financial figures. A widow tracking Blackwood's victims, perhaps. Father Mendez's room, the ascetic cell of a man who owned almost nothing, worn Bible, spare cassock, letters of introduction from the diocese. Magnus Thorne's room, furs, traps, weapons, the accumulated gear of a mountain man's trade, but nothing incriminating. The 2nd floor yielded similar results. The Blackwoods' room, now just Constance's, revealed an interesting detail. Separate trunks, separate belongings, a married couple who traveled as strangers. Theodore's trunk contained more papers, more journals, evidence of a life spent documenting his own crimes, with the peculiar pride of men who believe they're too clever to ever face justice. But no body. The 1st floor parlor, dining room, kitchen, storage rooms, also empty of corpses. Harrison Webb's private quarters revealed only the sad accumulation of a failed innkeeper barely scraping by, his ledgers showing more debt than profit, his pantry nearly bare. His wife's sewing room held fabric, thread, nothing more sinister than a broken spinning wheel. They reconvened in the parlor as midnight approached, the storm, if anything, more violent than before, the building creaking under assault that felt personal, vindictive, as if nature itself wanted to tear apart this structure and expose everyone's secrets to wind and rain and lightning judgment. Nothing, Caleb Sherman reported. Checked every damn room, every closet. No body, no sign of where it went. The cellar, Thorne said suddenly. Building this size, built into the cliff, there's got to be a cellar. Storage for winter supplies, maybe a root cellar. Webb nodded nervously. Yes, through the kitchen. But I was in there earlier, getting supplies for dinner. I would have noticed a body. Show us anyway, Cross demanded. The cellar entrance was a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, heavy timber with iron ring handles. It took Thorne's strength to lift it. The hinges were rusted, suggesting it wasn't opened frequently. Darkness yawned below, thick and absolute. Webb handed Cross a lamp, and he descended narrow wooden stairs that groaned under his weight, into cold air that smelled of earth and old potatoes and something else, something copper and organic. The cellar was larger than Cross expected, 20 feet square, ceiling so low Thorne had to duck, walls of rough stone carved directly from the mountain. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods, barrels of flour and salt. hanging sides of bacon. And in the corner, partially covered by a canvas tarp. "Found him," Cross called up. The others descended in a clatter of boots and nervous breathing. Cross pulled back the tarp, revealing Theodore Blackwood's corpse, now stiff with rigor mortis, his expensive suit still dark with dried blood. But the knife was gone, removed from his back, leaving only the wound, a star-shaped puncture between the shoulder blades, precise, professional, intended to pierce the heart from behind. "Who moved him down here?" Rebecca Miller whispered. "And why?" "To buy time," Cross said, straightening. "The killer needed to delay the investigation, create confusion. They knew we'd eventually search the building and find him. But every minute we spent looking was a minute they could use to cover their tracks, dispose of evidence, establish an alibi. Or, Silas Quinn suggested darkly, they wanted to demonstrate that they can move freely through this hotel without being detected, that we're not safe, that none of us control this situation. It's psychological warfare, make us panic, make us distrust each other more than we already do." He wasn't wrong. The corpse's disappearance and reappearance had achieved exactly that. Cross could see it in every face. Fear, paranoia, the recognition that someone in their small group had committed murder with planning and audacity that suggested they wouldn't stop at one victim. "We need to stay together," Father Mendez said, his voice steady despite obvious fear. "Nobody should be alone. Safety in numbers." "Unless one of the numbers is a killer," Caleb Sherman countered. "Then we're just trapped with the fox, waiting to see who he picks off next." Cross examined the body more closely, looking for details he might have missed in the initial chaos. Blackwood's pockets had been emptied, wallet, watch, anything of value gone. His hands bore defensive wounds, cuts across the palms, suggesting he tried to grab the knife. Had fought back. That contradicted the initial crime scene, where he'd appeared to have been taken completely by surprise. Which meant what? That there had been a struggle Cross hadn't observed? Or that these wounds had been added post-mortem to create a false narrative? He lifted Blackwood's right hand, studying the cuts under lamplight. The blood in these wounds was still liquid, not fully clotted. These cuts were fresh, inflicted after death, probably when the body was moved. Someone was staging evidence, creating a story that didn't match reality. "The killer's smart," Cross said, mostly to himself. "They're not just covering their tracks. They're creating false trails, making us chase shadows." A sound from upstairs made everyone freeze, a door slamming hard, then footsteps running. Cross was moving before thought, taking the cellar stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the kitchen with revolver raised. The others followed in a chaos of shouted questions and drawn weapons. In the kitchen doorway stood Constance Blackwood, her hair disheveled, her nightgown torn, eyes wild with terror. "My room," she gasped. "Someone was in my room. I woke up and saw a figure standing over my bed, just watching me. When I screamed, they ran." "Which direction?" Cross demanded. "Toward the back stairs, the servants' staircase." Cross hadn't known there was a servants' staircase. Webb had failed to mention it during the initial search. He glared at the innkeeper. "Show me." "Now." Webb led them through a narrow hallway behind the kitchen that Cross had assumed was just storage. At the end, a cramped staircase spiraled upward, barely wide enough for one person. This was how servants would have moved through the building back when the hotel could afford servants, allowing them to service rooms without disturbing guests. And now it had become the killer's highway, a path that bypassed the main halls, allowing movement between floors without being seen. "Why didn't you mention this?" Cross demanded. I didn't think it mattered," Webb stammered. "We haven't used it in years. The door at the top is supposed to be locked." They climbed the narrow spiral, emerging on the 3rd floor through a door hidden behind a decorative screen. The lock was broken, had been for some time based on the rust and damage. Anyone with basic knowledge of the hotel's layout could use this passage, which meant everyone was more mobile than Cross had assumed, alibis more fragile, the locked room murder suddenly more explicable. "This changes everything," Thorne rumbled. "Killer could have used these stairs to move between floors. Could have been in Blackwood's room waiting for him. Struck, then escaped down here while we were all gathering in the hall. Cross nodded, his mind racing through implications. The locked room wasn't locked at all. Just appeared that way because the killer had used a route none of them knew existed. It was clever, required advanced knowledge, which meant the killer had either stayed here before or had scouted the location carefully. "Mr. Webb," Cross said slowly, "has anyone else stayed at this hotel in the past few months? Anyone who might have learned about the servants' stairs?" Webb's face went pale. "Ah, yes. 6 weeks ago. A man traveled alone, stayed 3 nights. Said he was a surveyor for the railroad, checking routes through the mountain pass. He asked a lot of questions about the building's layout. Said he was interested in architecture. I thought he was just making conversation." "Description," Cross demanded. "Tall, thin, wore spectacles. Had a scar on his left hand. Burned scar in the shape of a cross. Spoke with an accent, Boston, maybe. Or wait." Webb's eyes went wide with realization. He said his name was Thomas Blake, but his voice, it sounded just like. A crash from the first floor cut him off, then screaming. Male this time, raw and agonized. They thundered down the main stairs, weapons drawn, expecting another body, another impossible crime. They found Silas Quinn in the dining room, collapsed against the table, clutching his left arm. Blood seeped between his fingers, and in the lamplight Cross could see a wound. Not a stab, but a burn. A fresh burn in the shape of a cross, still smoking. "Someone attacked me," Quinn gasped through clenched teeth. "Came out of nowhere, grabbed my arm, pressed something hot against it. Didn't say a word, just burned me and vanished." Cross examined the wound. It was indeed a burn, and the shape was deliberate, a perfect cross, like a brand, like a signature. He looked at Webb, the surveyor. He had a burn scar shaped like a cross. "You said so yourself." "But that man isn't here," Webb protested. "That was 6 weeks ago. He left. I watched him leave." Unless he never really left, Cross thought. Unless Thomas Blake, if that was even his real name, had found a way to stay hidden in the hotel, living in the walls like a ghost, waiting for the right moment, the right collection of victims, the right storm to trap everyone inside. "The hotel has more secrets," Cross said grimly. "More hidden passages, more spaces we haven't searched. Mr. Webb, I need you to tell me everything about this building. Every hidden corner, every crawl space, every place someone could hide. Because we're not alone in this hotel. There's someone else here. Someone who knows this place better than any of us. And they're hunting." Webb's revelations came out in a terrified rush, his hands shaking as he produced old architectural plans from a locked cabinet in his office. The Mountain Pass Hotel wasn't just an inn. It had been built 20 years ago by a religious order, a monastery meant to provide shelter for travelers crossing the treacherous pass. When the monks abandoned it due to harsh winters and isolation, Webb's father had purchased it cheap and converted it to commercial use. But the original structure remained, including features the monks had built for their secluded lifestyle. "There's a chapel," Webb admitted, unrolling yellow blueprints across the dining table, hidden behind the east wall of the cellar. The monks used it for private devotions, and there's a network of maintenance crawl spaces between the walls. They use them to move between rooms without disturbing other monks during prayer hours. My father sealed most of the entrances when he renovated, but he trailed off, guilt and fear warring on his face. "But not all of them," Cross finished. "So someone could be living in the walls, moving through the building at will, watching us through cracks, listening to every conversation." "That's insane," Caleb Sherman protested. "You're saying there's a ghost in the walls?" "Not a ghost. A man." Cross studied the blueprints, tracing the network of passages that spiderwebbed through the structure like veins in a body. Someone with these plans could indeed move invisibly, appear and disappear, seem supernatural when they were simply exploiting architecture designed for secrecy. "The chapel," Father Mendez said suddenly, his voice tight. "We need to see this chapel. If the hotel was built by monks, there may be something there, records, evidence, Something that explains why we were all brought here. Brought here. Rebecca Miller's voice trembled. You think this was planned? That someone wanted all of us in this hotel tonight. Cross had been thinking the same thing. 12 strangers, all connected to Theodore Blackwood's crimes in some way, trapped by a storm that seemed almost too convenient. Magnus Thorne hunting Blackwood for 3 years. Delilah Kane following him for 6 months. Mr. Chenowed money. Constance Blackwood married to him. Even the Sherman brothers. Cross hadn't yet discovered their connection, but he'd bet his life one existed. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. The chapel, Cross said. Everyone stays together. We move as a group. Nobody separates for any reason. They descended to the cellar again, Webb leading them past Blackwood's corpse, which they'd covered with the tarp once more, to the east wall. What had appeared to be solid stone revealed itself as a facade when Webb pressed a specific stone. A section of the wall swung inward with a groan of ancient hinges, revealing a passage lit by flickering lamplight from within. Someone had been here recently. The dust on the floor bore fresh footprints. Cross entered first, revolver extended, every sense screaming danger. The passage was narrow, carved from living rock, walls weeping moisture that made the air taste of minerals and earth. After 20 feet, it opened into a chamber that took his breath away. The chapel was small but magnificent. Vaulted ceiling carved with religious frescoes, stone altar draped in white linen, wooden pews worn smooth by decades of monks kneeling in prayer. But what drew Cross's attention was the wall behind the altar, covered in photographs. Dozens of them, pinned to the stone like specimens in a collector's display. And every photograph showed Theodore Blackwood. Blackwood at various ages, in different cities, always surrounded by victims whose faces had been circled in red ink. Silver Creek, the massacre Magnus Thorne had described. Denver, a list of names beside a burned building. San Francisco, Delilah Kane's husband among a group of ruined investors. Dodge City, the Sherman brothers' father, Cross realized, seeing the family resemblance, standing beside Blackwood before some doomed venture. And more, so many more. 20 years of crimes documented with obsessive precision. Mother of God, Father Mendez whispered, crossing himself. In the center of this gallery of sin, one photograph stood larger than the rest, a young woman, perhaps 16, with gentle eyes and a shy smile. Beneath it, written in careful script, Maria Elena Vasquez. Innocent, pure, murdered by Theodore Blackwood, 1870. Justice delayed is justice denied. Maria, a voice said from the shadows behind the altar. Everyone spun, weapons rising, as a figure emerged into lamplight. Tall, thin, wearing monk's robes that hung loose on a frame carved lean by obsession and rage. His face was gaunt, ascetic, marked by suffering, and on his left hand, a burned scar in the shape of a cross. Thomas Blake, Webb gasped. But you left. I saw you. I never left, the man interrupted, his voice cultured, educated, carrying traces of Spanish accent beneath Boston refinement. I've been here for 6 weeks, living in the passages the brothers built, waiting, planning, praying for the courage to do what God and law refused to do. Cross kept his revolver aimed at the man's chest. You're behind this. The storm, bringing everyone here. I can't control weather, Detective Cross. The man smiled sadly. That was divine providence. I merely sent letters to those I knew were hunting Theodore Blackwood, suggested they might find him traveling through Mountain Pass on this date. The storm was God's decision, or perhaps just meteorology. Does it matter? You killed him, Magnus Thorne said. Not a question. Yes. No hesitation, no guilt in his voice. I killed Theodore Blackwood. After 20 years of watching him destroy lives with impunity, I became the instrument of justice that society refused to provide. Who is she? Delilah Kane asked, gesturing to the photograph. Maria Elena? The man's face transformed. Grief so profound it seemed to age him decades in seconds. My sister. We came to America from Mexico in 1868, orphans seeking a new life. I was 18. She was 15. Beautiful, innocent, full of dreams. Theodore Blackwood found her working in a San Francisco hotel. He seduced her with promises of marriage, got her pregnant, then had her killed to hide the scandal. Made it look like suicide. She was 16 years old. My God, Rebecca Miller breathed. His name was Lorenzo Vasquez, Mr. Chin said quietly. I remember the story. The girl who jumped from the hotel window. But there were rumors. She didn't jump, Lorenzo said, his voice cracking. Blackwood's men threw her. I found evidence, witnesses who saw it happen. But Blackwood had money influence. The police called me a grieving brother, making false accusations. No one would listen. So I became Brother Lorenzo, joined the Franciscan order, dedicated my life to prayer and poverty. But the hunger for justice never left. It grew inside me like a cancer, holy and terrible. He moved to the altar, picked up the knife, the Chinese blade that had killed Blackwood. For 20 years I tracked him, documented every crime, every victim. I took vows of poverty and chastity, but I never promised to let evil go unpunished. The order doesn't know. They think I'm establishing a mission in the mining camps. Instead, I've been establishing justice. You framed Father Mendez, Cross said. Bought a knife, claimed to lose it, made him the obvious suspect. Father Mendez is innocent, Lorenzo agreed, as are most of you in the legal sense. But morally, his eyes swept the group. Mr. Thorne, you've killed 16 men in your pursuit of Blackwood. Mrs. Kane, you poisoned a man in Denver who'd worked with Blackwood. The Sherman brothers murdered a witness who could have testified against Blackwood in Cheyenne. Mr. Chin traffics in opium that destroys thousands of lives. Even you, Detective Cross, I know about the suspect you shot in an alley in St. Louis. The one who was unarmed. The one you planted a gun on to justify the killing. Cross felt ice flood his veins. That was his deepest secret. The sin that had driven him to resign from the Pinkertons. How could this madman know? We're all guilty, Lorenzo continued. All stained. I'm no better than any of you. I murdered a man in cold blood, hid his body, terrorized you all. But Theodore Blackwood's crimes were so vast, so unpunished, that extraordinary measures became necessary. Someone had to act. God chose me. God doesn't choose murderers, Father Mendez said firmly. Doesn't he? Lorenzo smiled bitterly. He chose Moses, who killed an Egyptian. David, who murdered Uriah. Peter, who denied Christ. God uses broken instruments, Father. We're all broken. The question is whether we break toward justice or cowardice. This isn't justice, Cross said. This is revenge dressed in religious robes. Perhaps, but Maria is avenged, and 20 years of victims can rest knowing Blackwood faced judgment. Lorenzo set down the knife, held out his hands. I'm done. I'll confess everything to the authorities when the storm breaks. Hang me if you want. My sister is avenged. That's all that matters. Magnus Thorne stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the lamplight. For a moment, Cross thought he'd attack Lorenzo. Instead, he extended his hand. Your sister was innocent. My wife and daughter were innocent. Blackwood deserved worse than a quick knife, but you gave him more justice than the law would have provided. Slowly and possibly, they began to nod. Delilah Kane, the Sherman brothers. Even Mr. Chin bowed his head in acknowledgement. These people, all victims of Blackwood's crimes in some way, recognized Lorenzo not as a criminal, but as the executor of justice they'd all been seeking. No, Cross said sharply. I understand the desire for revenge. God knows I do. But we can't condone murder. We can't become the very lawlessness we claim to fight against. Then arrest me, Detective, Lorenzo said calmly. When the storm passes, take me to the nearest marshal. I'll confess everything. I'll hang without protest. My life for Maria's memory. That's a trade I made 20 years ago. Before Cross could respond, Constance Blackwood spoke, her voice stronger than before. My husband kept records, detailed journals of every crime, every victim, every dollar earned from misery. There in his trunk. I'll testify. I'll make sure the world knows what he was, what Lorenzo avenged. Maybe it won't save you from the rope, brother, but it will ensure your sister's name is cleared." "Thank you," Lorenzo whispered, tears finally breaking free. The storm outside reached a crescendo, then suddenly silence. The wind died. The rain stopped. In the abrupt quiet, they could hear the drip of water from the eaves, the settling of the building, the return of ordinary sounds after hours of chaos. "It's over," Rebecca Miller said wonderingly, moving to check the window. The storm passed. But Cross knew better. The storm outside had ended. The storm inside, the tempest of guilt, justice, revenge, and moral complexity, that would rage much longer. They emerged from the chapel in silence, each person carrying their own weight of revelation. Blackwood's body would be reported to authorities. Lorenzo Vasquez would face trial. But Cross suspected that when all the evidence came to light, when Constance testified, when the journals were read, when the full scope of Blackwood's crimes became public, a jury might find mercy for a brother who'd spent 20 years seeking justice the law refused to provide. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and rose, Cross stood on the hotel porch watching the sunrise. Father Mendez joined him, silent for a long moment. "Do you believe God chose Lorenzo?" Mendez asked finally. Cross considered the question. "I believe desperate men make desperate choices. I believe justice and vengeance are sometimes separated by a line so thin it becomes invisible. And I believe your God, if he exists, has a sense of irony, bringing 12 judged sinners together to judge another's sin." "That's not an answer, Detective." Cross smiled grimly. "It's the only answer I have." The morning sun revealed what the storm had hidden, a landscape transformed. The mountain pass road had become a river of mud, impassable for at least 3 days. Telegraph lines lay tangled in the canyon below, like broken spider webs. The Mountain Pass Hotel remained an island of civilization, surrounded by wilderness that cared nothing for human schedules or justice. Cross stood in the dining room, watching Lorenzo Vasquez eat breakfast with the calm of a man who'd made peace with his fate. The former monk had removed his robes, revealing simple traveling clothes beneath. Without the religious costume, he looked younger, more vulnerable, just a man who'd dedicated his life to avenging a murdered sister. "You planned this carefully," Cross said, sitting across from him. 6 weeks of preparation, learning the building's secrets, timing everything for when Blackwood would be traveling through. "You're intelligent, organized. You could have built a different life instead of throwing it away on revenge." Lorenzo stirred his coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl. "I tried, Detective. For 15 years, I tried to let God handle justice. I prayed. I served the poor. I counseled the dying. I did everything a good Franciscan should do. But every night I saw Maria's face, heard her screaming as they pushed her from that window, saw her body broken on the street below." His voice remained steady, but his hands trembled. "There's a limit to what a human soul can endure. I reached mine. So you became judge, jury, and executioner." "No." Lorenzo looked up, his eyes clear. "I became the instrument. Blackwood judged himself through his actions. Every victim was a verdict. I merely carried out the sentence that society lacked the courage to impose." Magnus Thorne entered, carrying his pack, clearly preparing to leave despite the impassable road. "I'll try the northern trail," he announced to the room at large. "Been through worse conditions. Figure I can make the mining camp by tomorrow if I push hard." "Running?" Cross asked. Thorne's expression darkened. "Leaving. There's a difference. My business here is done. Blackwood's dead. That's what I came for. Don't need to watch the aftermath." "You're afraid they'll investigate you," Cross realized. "Afraid that when authorities dig into Blackwood's death, they'll uncover your own crimes." The 16 men Lorenzo mentioned weren't crimes, Thorne said flatly. "Were justice. Every man I killed earned his death working for Blackwood. The rifle runners who sold weapons to the Crow. The enforcers who burned out families who couldn't pay protection money. The foreman who deliberately set explosives wrong. Killing miners Blackwood wanted eliminated. I gave them all more mercy than they gave their victims. I made it quick. That's still murder under law. Under law, maybe. Under God's law. Thorne shouldered his pack. I'll take my chances with God before I trust any territorial court. They're all bought and paid for by men like Blackwood. He walked out without looking back, his massive frame silhouetted briefly in the doorway before disappearing into the muddy morning. Cross didn't try to stop him. Let the mountain judge whether Magnus Thorne deserved to escape or die in some frozen ravine. That was beyond a detective's jurisdiction. The Sherman brothers were next to leave, saddling their horses despite Webb's warnings about the treacherous conditions. Cross caught them in the stable, where morning light streamed through gaps in the timber walls, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. Your father, Cross said without preamble. He died because of Blackwood. That's your connection. Caleb Sherman's hand moved toward his revolver, then stopped. His brother Luke placed a restraining hand on his arm. Finally, Caleb spoke. Pa invested in a cattle scheme Blackwood organized. Supposed to be a sure thing. Government contracts to supply reservation beef. But Blackwood was delivering rotten meat, pocketing the difference. When Pa threatened to expose him, his ranch burned down. Pa was inside. We were 13 and 11. Luke added quietly. Watched our father burn alive because he tried to do the right thing. Spent the next 15 years learning to shoot, learning to track, learning to survive. Been hunting Blackwood ever since. But you didn't kill him, Cross said. Didn't get the chance. Caleb's smile was bitter. Lorenzo beat us to it. Part of me's grateful. Part of me wishes I'd been the one to put that knife in his back. Guess that makes me as much a murderer in intent as Lorenzo is in action. Intent isn't the same as action under law. Maybe, but it's the same under God's judgment, which is what really matters. Caleb swung into his saddle. We're riding south, Detective. You want to follow us, try to bring us in for conspiracy, or whatever charge applies, go ahead. But you'll die trying. We've got nothing left to lose except our freedom, and freedom don't mean much when you're carrying ghosts. They rode out, their horses struggling through mud that came up to their hocks. Cross watched them go, making no move to stop them. How many more killers would he let walk away before this was over? How many times could he excuse murder because the victim deserved it? Back inside, he found Delilah Kane packing her belongings with meticulous care, folding each garment as if preparing for a long journey. Her veil lay discarded on the bed. She no longer hid her face, and Cross saw clearly the beauty that grief had carved into something harder and more enduring than mere prettiness. You poisoned someone in Denver, Cross said from the doorway. Lorenzo wasn't lying. Delilah didn't stop packing. Gerald Hastings, Blackwood's accountant, the man who cooked the books on the worthless mine, who created false essays to trick investors like my husband. I tracked him to a hotel in Denver, befriended him in a restaurant, added arsenic to his wine. Her voice carried no more emotion than if she were recounting a recipe. He died slowly, painfully. I watched from across the room, felt nothing but satisfaction. That's murder. Premeditated, cold-blooded. That's justice. She turned to face him finally. My husband was a good man, Detective. Honest, hard-working, trusting. He believed in the promise of the West, believed hard work and integrity would be rewarded. Blackwood and men like Hastings destroyed that belief, destroyed him. When he put that gun to his head, they pulled the trigger as surely as if they'd been in the room. So you became a killer to balance the scales. I became a widow seeking what the law refused to provide. She closed her bag with finality. I spent 6 months tracking Blackwood, planning how to make him suffer. Lorenzo denied me that satisfaction by killing him quickly. But I have the journals now. Constance gave them to me this morning. I'm going to publish them, every page, every crime. I'll make sure the world knows what Theodore Blackwood was. That's my justice now. Cross couldn't argue with that. Exposing Blackwood's crimes might prevent others from following his path, might give some measure of peace to victims and their families. It was more constructive than murder, at least. Mr. Chen appeared in the hallway, dressed for travel, his silk robes replaced by practical Western clothing that made him look less exotic and more dangerous. "Detective Cross, a moment of your time." They walked to the empty parlor, where morning light streamed through windows overlooking the devastated landscape. Chen moved to the fireplace, stared into cold ashes that held the ghost of last night's warmth. "The opium trade," Chen said quietly. "Lorenzo was correct. I facilitate shipments from San Francisco to mining camps, railroad towns, anywhere men seek escape from pain. I tell myself I'm merely a businessman, that I don't force anyone to smoke, that every addict makes their own choice. But I know the truth. I profit from misery." "Then why continue?" "Because I have a family in California. 3 daughters, a wife, aging parents who depend on me. The legitimate trade, silk, tea, porcelain, barely covers expenses. The opium trade pays for my daughter's education, for my parents' medical care, for my wife's security. I am trapped between 2 sins, abandoning my family or poisoning strangers." He turned to face Cross. "Which would you choose, detective?" Cross had no answer. The question was too large, too complex, touching on moral territories he'd never had to navigate. "I'd find a third path." "Ah, the American optimism." Chen smiled sadly. "Always believing there's a better way, a cleaner solution. But life is rarely so accommodating. We make choices in darkness, hope they're correct, and live with the consequences." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I knew Blackwood was a monster. When he approached me about trafficking weapons along with the opium, I refused. That refusal cost me $50,000 he owed me. But there are some lines even a drug smuggler won't cross. Does that make me less guilty?" "It makes you human. That's not the same as innocent." Chen nodded. "I will think on that distinction as I return to San Francisco. Perhaps it will comfort me when I next fill an opium pipe for a man destroying his life. Or perhaps not." He bowed formally, a gesture from a culture Cross barely understood, and departed. By mid-morning, only 6 guests remained: Cross, Lorenzo, Constance Blackwood, Rebecca Miller, Father Mendez, and Silas Quinn. The others had fled or departed, choosing to face the wilderness rather than the questions and judgments that would come when authorities finally arrived. Rebecca Miller found Cross on the porch, where he stood watching the muddy road that would eventually bring sheriffs, marshals, maybe even federal investigators. The young woman had changed from her traveling dress to something simpler, more practical, and her Bible was nowhere in sight. "I lied about Montana," she said without preamble. "There's no intended husband. That was a story to explain why a woman would travel alone through dangerous territory." Cross wasn't surprised. He'd suspected from the beginning. "So why are you really here?" "Because Theodore Blackwood raped my mother 20 years ago when she worked in his San Francisco house. She was a maid, 16 years old, powerless. When she became pregnant, he had her thrown out with nothing. My mother raised me alone, working herself to death in factories and laundries. She died last year, finally free of the poverty and shame he'd condemned her to." Rebecca's voice remained calm, factual, as if reading from a ledger. "I'm here because I wanted to watch him die. Wanted him to know before the end that some sins echo across decades. But Lorenzo killed him before I could make myself known." "You were planning to kill him yourself." Rebecca pulled a small Derringer from her pocket, a lady's gun, easily concealed, deadly at close range. "I've carried this for 6 months, practicing my courage. But I'm a coward, detective. I couldn't do it. Lorenzo had the strength I lacked." "Not doing it doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human. Or weak. I'm not sure there's a difference." She returned the Derringer to her pocket. "What will happen to Lorenzo?" "He'll stand trial. Probably hang, regardless of the circumstances. Law doesn't recognize revenge as justification. But God might." Cross looked at this young woman, who'd lived her entire life in the shadow of her mother's violation, who traveled hundreds of miles seeking vengeance she couldn't execute. "I don't know what God recognizes, I barely understand what law recognizes anymore. Constance Blackwood appeared at noon, transformed. She'd shed her mourning black for a traveling dress of deep green, styled her hair, applied cosmetics that brought color back to her pale face. She looked 10 years younger, as if her husband's death had lifted a curse. "I'm going to San Francisco," she announced. "I have my husband's journals, his financial records, documentation of 20 years of crimes. I'm hiring the best lawyers I can find. I'm going to testify against his estate, his business partners, everyone who enabled his evil. I'm going to burn his empire to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." "That will destroy your own financial security," Cross pointed out. "I don't care. I've lived 20 years as the wife of a monster, smiling at society parties while knowing the truth. I have enough jewelry to sell, enough skills to work. I'll die poor and honest rather than live another day on blood money." Her eyes found Lorenzo through the window, where he sat alone in the dining room. "I'm going to help him too. Hire him the best defense lawyer money can buy. Make sure his story is heard. He killed my husband, but he freed me. That's worth fighting for." By afternoon, the road remained impassable, and Cross knew they'd be trapped at least one more night. He found Father Mendez in the hidden chapel, kneeling before the altar where Lorenzo's photographs still covered the wall, a gallery of Blackwood's victims, a shrine to justice denied and finally claimed. "You're praying for him," Cross said. "For Lorenzo." Mendez didn't rise. "For all of us. We're all complicit, Detective. Everyone who knew what Blackwood was and did nothing. Everyone who profited from systems that allowed men like him to thrive. Everyone who looked away because the victims weren't our concern. Lorenzo pulled the trigger, but society loaded the gun. That's philosophy, not law. Law is philosophy written down and enforced selectively." Mendez finally stood, his knees creaking. "I was a real priest once. Had a parish in Santa Fe. Tended my flock, believed I was doing God's work. Then I learned the diocese was covering up crimes by wealthy donors. Young girls abused, families threatened, evidence buried to protect the church's reputation. I objected. They transferred me to the frontier, sent me to establish missions and mining camps where I'd be too far away to cause trouble." His laugh was bitter, but God has a sense of humor. He put me in a hotel with a dozen sinners seeking justice, showed me that sometimes righteousness comes through broken vessels. "You think Lorenzo was righteous?" "I think he was human, and humanity is always a mix of light and shadow, justice and vengeance, love and rage. The question isn't whether Lorenzo was righteous. The question is whether any of us could have done differently in his place." Cross had no answer. That was the question that had haunted him all day, watching killers and conspirators depart, unable or unwilling to stop them. What would he have done if it were his sister, his wife, his child? How far would Daniel Cross go for justice when the law failed? He feared he already knew the answer. That's why he'd let them leave. The second morning dawned clear and cold, the storm's passage leaving behind air so clean it hurt to breathe, like inhaling truth after a lifetime of lies. The road remained impassable, but Cross could see riders in the distance, a marshal's posse, finally making their way through the treacherous conditions, drawn by the telegraph silence and reports of travelers trapped at the mountain pass. Lorenzo Vasquez stood on the porch beside Cross, watching them approach with the serenity of a man who'd surrendered to fate. He'd spent the night in prayer, emerging at dawn with his face peaceful, almost luminous, as if he'd finally made peace with his soul. "I don't regret it," Lorenzo said quietly. "Killing him. I know I should. I know a good Christian would feel remorse, would beg forgiveness. But all I feel is relief. Maria can rest now. That's worth whatever happens to me." "They'll hang you," Cross said bluntly. "Constance's testimony might generate sympathy, but law is law. Murder is murder." "I know." Lorenzo smiled. "I've been dead for 20 years, Detective. Ever since I identified my sister's broken body on that San Francisco street. The rope will just make it official." The marshal arrived with 6 deputies, all hard men with frontier justice written on their weathered faces. Marshal Tom Harker was 60, white-bearded, carrying the authority of 3 decades, enforcing law in territories where law was more suggestion than requirement. "Daniel Cross," Harker said, recognizing him immediately. "Heard you left the Pinkertons. Didn't expect to find you here." "Didn't expect to be here, Tom. Storm trapped us." Harker's eyes swept the hotel, counting people, noting absences. Telegraph said 12 guests checked in before the storm. "I count 6 now. Where's the rest?" "Gone. Left when the storm broke." "And Theodore Blackwood?" "He was registered here. Wife says he's dead. In the cellar. Stabbed in the back. This man killed him." Cross gestured to Lorenzo. "Brother Lorenzo Vasquez. He confesses freely. Claims it was justice for his sister's murder 20 years ago." Harker's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Vasquez. Mexican girl who jumped from a hotel window in San Francisco, 1870. Didn't jump. Was murdered. Blackwood ordered it." "Can you prove that?" "I can," Constance Blackwood said, emerging with an armful of journals. "My husband documented everything. Every crime, every victim, every dollar earned from misery. It's all here, including what he did to Maria Elena Vasquez." Harker took the journals, flipped through pages, his face hardening as he read. Finally, he looked up at Lorenzo. "You killed him for this? For your sister?" "Yes, Marshal. I'm guilty. I planned it, executed it. Accept full responsibility. These others are innocent. They were simply trapped here by weather. I'm ready to face justice." "Justice." Harker seemed to taste the word, find it wanting. He looked at Cross. "You investigated this? You're satisfied he's guilty?" "Completely. He confesses. The evidence confirms it. There's no doubt." "And the others who left? They involved?" Cross hesitated, feeling the weight of the choice. He could tell the truth, that half the guests had been conspirators or potential killers themselves, that they'd all come hunting Blackwood, that Lorenzo had simply acted first. Or he could lie, protect them, let them disappear into the vast anonymity of the frontier. "No involvement," Cross said finally. "They were travelers, trapped by the storm. They left when the road cleared enough. Simple as that." Harker studied him for a long moment, and Cross knew the marshal didn't believe him. But frontier law operated on pragmatism more than truth, chasing down scattered witnesses for a trial defending Theodore Blackwood, a man whose journals documented decades of crimes. That was too much effort for too little gain. "All right," Harker said finally. "Lorenzo Vasquez, I'm arresting you for the murder of Theodore Blackwood. You'll be taken to the territorial court, tried, and likely hanged." He turned to his deputies. "Get the body. We'll transport it back for burial." But as the deputies moved toward the cellar, something unexpected happened. Constance Blackwood stepped forward, blocking their path. "Wait, I want to make a formal statement. About my husband's crimes. About what he did to Maria Vasquez and hundreds of others. About the systematic corruption that allowed him to operate with impunity for 20 years. Ma'am, that's not. I'm a wealthy woman, Marshal. Influential family back east. When I speak, newspapers listen. I'm going to make sure this story is told. Every detail, every victim, every crime. I'm going to expose the territorial government officials who took bribes from my husband, the judges he bought, the sheriffs he owned, the entire rotten system that enabled him." Her voice carried steel. "And if you try to hang Lorenzo Vasquez quickly and quietly to avoid embarrassment, I'll make certain that story is told loudest of all." Harker's face reddened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm promising you. Justice for Lorenzo means justice for everyone, including the system that failed his sister." A standoff developed, tension crackling between Constance's determination and Harker's authority. Cross watched, fascinated, seeing the future pivot on this moment. Would frontier justice crush Lorenzo to protect its own corruption? Or would truth finally find purchase? Father Mendez joined Constance, his priest's collar catching the morning light. I'll testify as well. About what I witnessed here. About the evidence in those journals. This isn't a simple murder, Marshal. This is the culmination of 20 years of injustice. The church will be watching how you handle it. Silas Quinn stepped forward next, and I'll use every contact in every gambling hall and saloon across 3 territories to spread the word. How a grieving brother finally got justice, while the law that should have protected his sister sat idle. That's the kind of story men remember. The kind that makes marshals and judges very unpopular. Rebecca Miller was last, this quiet young woman who'd carried a derringer for 6 months, but lacked the courage to use it. My mother was one of Blackwood's victims too. I'll tell her story. Tell how the system protects rich predators, while their victims die in poverty and shame. Make sure everyone knows exactly who's being hanged and why. Cross felt something shift in the morning air. The balance of power realigning. The weak finding strength in numbers. The silenced finally speaking. This was how change happened on the frontier. Not through law or government, but through ordinary people refusing to accept injustice any longer. Harker looked at each face, measuring determination against the political cost of opposition. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly. Not defeat, but pragmatic acceptance. The trial will be public. Full testimony allowed. Evidence presented completely. If Vasquez is convicted, the sentence will be carried out according to law, but the process will be transparent. He looked at Lorenzo. That's the best I can offer. Fair trial, honest judgment. That's all I ask, Lorenzo said quietly. My sister never got even that much. If I get more than she did, that's already a form of justice. They left by mid-morning. The marshal's posse, Lorenzo in chains, Constance Blackwood riding alongside with her husband's journals, Father Mendez accompanying them to ensure proper treatment, Silas Quinn heading to the nearest town with telegraph access to begin spreading the story. Rebecca Miller remained behind with Cross and Harrison Webb, the 3 of them standing on the porch watching the procession disappear into the distance. Will he hang? Rebecca asked. Probably, Cross admitted. Murder is murder, regardless of motive. But at least his story will be heard. Maria's story will be heard. That's something. Is it enough? Cross didn't answer. Nothing would ever be enough to balance the scales of justice for people like Maria Vasquez, for all the victims ground beneath the wheels of men like Theodore Blackwood. But bearing witness, speaking truth, refusing to forget, maybe that was all justice ever amounted to. Small acts of remembrance against the vast machinery of forgetting. Harrison Webb cleared his throat nervously. What do I tell people when they ask what happened here? Tell the truth, Cross said. That 12 sinners gathered in a mountain hotel during a storm. That one of them committed murder. That the rest of them had to decide what justice looked like when law had failed. And that they chose mercy over vengeance, truth over comfort, speaking out over staying silent. He smiled grimly. Tell them it's not a simple story. Real justice never is. Webb nodded slowly and retreated inside, leaving Cross and Rebecca alone with the morning. What will you do now? Rebecca asked. Cross considered the question. He'd come to this hotel a drifter, running from his own sins, hiding from the memory of that unarmed man he'd shot in a St. Louis alley. But something had changed during the long storm night. He'd seen people choose justice over safety, truth over complicity, standing up over staying silent. Maybe it was time he did the same. I'm going to San Francisco, he said, going to help Constance burn down Blackwood's empire. Then maybe I'll find a marshal's office somewhere that needs an investigator who understands the difference between law and justice isn't always clear. Someone has to stand in that gap, try to bridge it. Might as well be me. Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile Cross had seen from her. That sounds like redemption, detective. Or just an old sinner trying to do less harm. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They stood in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of storm clouds, painting the mountains in shades of gold and hope. Somewhere ahead, Lorenzo Vasquez rode toward trial and almost certain execution. But a story would be told. His sister's name would be cleared, and the corrupt system that had enabled Theodore Blackwood would face at least some accounting. It wasn't perfect justice, but in the American West of 1887, where law was young and corruption was endemic, it was perhaps the best justice flawed humans could achieve. Imperfect, painful, earned through sacrifice, and paid for in blood and tears and broken hearts that chose truth anyway. Cross walked to his horse, saddled it slowly, preparing for the long ride ahead. As he mounted, Rebecca called out, "Detective, do you believe God was watching? That he guided everything that happened here?" Cross thought about Lorenzo's obsessive 20-year hunt, about the storm that trapped them all, about 12 guilty people forced to judge another's guilt, about justice that looked like murder and murder that looked like justice, and the impossibly thin line between them. "I believe the universe has a sense of irony," he said finally. "Whether that's God or just chaos finding patterns, I honestly don't know. But I know this: we're responsible for our choices, divine or not. And everyone in that hotel chose to stand for something, even when standing cost them safety. That's maybe as close to holy as humans get." He rode out as noon approached, following the muddy road down from the mountain pass toward whatever came next. Behind him, the Mountain Pass Hotel stood empty except for Harrison Webb and his silent wife, already beginning the work of cleaning Theodore Blackwood's blood from the cellar floor, scrubbing away evidence that would outlast memory, that would remain in the wood grain long after everyone who'd been there had turned to dust. Some stains never truly wash away. Some stories refuse to be forgotten, and some nights, storm dark and terrible, change everything that comes after, whether we're ready or not. That was the truth Cross carried down the mountain, into the valley, toward a future that held trials and testimony, and the hard work of building justice in a place where justice had always been scarce. Behind him, the mountains stood eternal, indifferent, keeping their secrets. Ahead, the world waited, full of broken people seeking truth. And Daniel Cross rode toward it, no longer running, finally ready to stand in the gap between law and justice, and do the hard work of bridging the distance. "See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you."